Mr. Chairman, members, good morning. Jay Darden, Commissioner. Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind, if I can make a few introductory remarks before you go into the explanation of the division and the governor's office and what have you, just to kind of give you an overview of kind of where we're going and what I think the committee is going to be dealing with over the course of the next several weeks.
Well, as long as it's related to House Bill 105, I think that fits. If we're going to kind of go off on something else, we don't need to do that today. You'll have the opportunity in the future, I can assure you, but I want to make sure that the agencies that are here get the opportunity and members get their questions asked. So if we can make an agreement on that, that's all I'm worried about today, is making sure that we get what we need done today.
My comments will relate to HB 105. I do want to show you one document in comparison on what HB 103 does and HB 105 does.
See, that's exactly what I don't want to do today. That is specifically what I do not want to do today. I want to address House Bill 105. You will have the opportunity to compare House Bill 103 or any other budget bill that's passed to House Bill 105 in time when that bill comes forward. Today is House Bill 105, and I'm trying to be as polite as I can, but I don't want to go down this rabbit hole where we're talking about two bills at the same time. We want to get everyone in this room focused on House Bill 105. If you don't like House Bill 105, we can address that afterwards. You and I can talk in the hall, meet tomorrow or something. But as it relates to this, I want to stick to the script that our staff has spent a tremendous amount of time on to make sure everything gets covered. So we're not going to do compare and contrast to different bills. We've never done it before, and we won't do it today. We've never discussed amendments on House Bill 1 when we did them. We just let House Bill 1 at the time roll through. We're going to do the same thing with House Bill 105. We're going to discuss it, and at the appropriate time, which is not today, we will have the opportunity to say all the things that are right and wrong with it. I'll give you all the time in the world you want on that whenever we get to Representative Leger's bill. I have no problem with that. Just as it relates to the budget hearings, I'm trying to get them in the proper manner that we have now, get them through so the agencies that are behind you that want to come testify, members have questions, and they're not going to have questions about the compare and contrast. We don't do that today. And another time, it's all yours. I'm trying to be as respectful as I can, but I want to get these budget hearings done today. I got members here, and I want them focused on the existing House Bill 105 if we can.
And I, too, want to be as respectful as you are, and I appreciate that. And I don't intend to go into HB 103. I understand you're considering HB 105, and there's no question in my mind that HB 105 will ultimately be the appropriations bill that's considered by you and that's considered by the Senate. What is important, though, and I think everyone realizes, and as Representative Biot raised the question, we have to talk about the procedure that's going to be involved here, because REC is going to meet, I hope and I believe, on April the 10th, which means that between now and April 10th, you're going to be having hearings, and you're going to be hearing from the departments who are going to be addressing what HB 105 looks like right now. And HB 105, as it looks like right now, represents a combination of two different forecasts that have been referenced. And I don't intend to get into the question of the constitutionality today. We've had that discussion before, and I understand your position. I wasn't intending to go down that rabbit hole, and won't unless somebody asks me about it. But what we do know is that HB 105 utilizes the June 18 forecast for the state general fund, and HB 105 utilizes the February 2019 forecast for statutory dedications and for self-generated revenue. And had you not done that, there would be a $4 billion or so gap in what's presented here. So it's important for the members to know what you know and what you've done in your bill, and that is recognize that HB 105 represents a picking and choosing, a cherry picking of different forecasts.
Right.
And,
so
and
what
all that will change once REC meets and hopefully April 10th adopts a new forecast, and then your HB 105 will be amended to reflect finally the reality of what our revenue picture looks like. And I think that's my understanding of what, and I'm not trying to read your mind, but I mean, I think you've indicated that's what you've said you do once we have a revenue forecast.
Correct. If we adjust more money one way or the other, state general fund up or down, obviously we'll amend it through the process to put it in. As it relates to fees, self-generated revenue, federal dollars, they are what they are. So as related to preparing the documents today, instead of having staff put $4 billion in on what is it? What do we mean, on the 10th or the 12th?
Right.
On the 10th, instead of them putting $4 billion worth of amendments on a bill on the 11th, and try to bring all of us in front of us now, we put it in a posture where most realistically, the reality of it is if REC meets and doesn't do anything, we can throw all of this away, right? Because that means we have no fees, we have no self-generated, zero. We're coming back into a special session. If they meet and only recognize fees and self-generated revenue, it'll look like this document here, correct? Assuming that we haven't, I don't think we're going to get much more on the federal side, but the fees, self-generated, and stat devs will look like this document here. And that's kind of the point of, by the time that the April 11th comes around, to have staff then prepare this presentation is completely unrealistic to have staff to do. So the debate is really how much more revenue from state general fund is going to come, is going to come in one way or the other. We're close to what we have right now. We'll be adding some money back in, maybe not. We might take until May, and we might never do it. But that's kind of the reality of where we are. With the focal point is on the state general fund dollars as we move forward.
Right, and the document that we passed out is the only thing I wanted to say was to make the point of the fact that 105 represents two different forecast numbers.
Correct.
So what you're going to hear, and this is the other thing that I think is important for you, you're going to hear from the departments that come before you in the next week and a half before April 10th. And they're going to be discussing for you what the budget looks like right now as 105 is proposed. You're probably going to bring them back after you've heard from them during these 10 days, because you're going to have a whole bunch of different numbers if the revenue forecast happens, as I hope it will. And regardless of what it may be, it could be Greg's forecast, which would be $90 million more. It could be Manfred's forecast, which would be $134 million more. Or, in all likelihood, it may be an entirely new number. As you know, Greg looks at numbers on a quarterly basis. He will have quarterly numbers now for that April 10th meeting. That suggests that he may be changing his forecast. I presume it's going to probably go up, because we haven't seen anything to suggest that the numbers are slowing down for this fiscal year. So point being, you may be seeing these same departments all over again to talk about the numbers that are generated at the April 10th meeting. The departments that come after April 10th will have to very hurriedly prepare their observations, because they don't know what that number may be on April 10th. So I'm just laying the groundwork for what is going to be a potentially confusing situation as we talk about all these numbers. But the only thing I wanted to say today, and recognizing what you said, Mr. Chairman, about getting into other budgets, was simply to give you an idea of what you're going to hear basically from some of these departments, because we've been working with them and talking to them about what they would have to do in response to HB 105 as it stands right now and as they'll be talking to you. So from that standpoint, you're going to hear, for example, problems that are going to be created for a number of the agencies. And because I think all of us, the governor's proposed budget, Representative Henry's proposed budget, what most all of you have been saying publicly, there's a desire to fund the teacher pay raise. And that's going to take about $100 million, round numbers, a little more than that, to give the pay raise at the amount that the governor has suggested. And so that means if you don't have all the revenue necessary that we've proposed under the 134 number, you're going to have to make cuts somewhere else to offset the fact that we're spending $100 million in new money on an expenditure that we didn't have previously. So this is what the departments are going to be telling you because of the way HB 105 is presently postured. For example, it does not fund the 1.375 increase in the MFP that would be going to the local school districts above and beyond the teacher pay raise. It does not include money to provide additional money for higher education, to take them away from just a stagnant budget that is not decreased this year or proposed next year, but does not increase them as to what we would like to do, assuming we get that additional revenue. You're going to hear that sheriff's housing is going to be short by about $17 million, which is going to potentially require the early release of some prisoners a few months before they would otherwise be released. You're going to hear from Youth Services that we just opened the Bunkie facility, but that Bunkie would only be able to open for 4 months into the next fiscal year based upon HB 105's numbers. And you're going to hear that LDH will be required to make about $22 million in reductions to its budget, which is going to require looking at those optional programs that nobody wants to talk about cutting, or cutting the public-private partners, because as we've talked about before, there are requirements in the Medicaid program to fund specific things that are not optional. You'll also hear that DCFS is going to be in a position of being $13
Commissioner,
million short.
those departments will let us know all that when they get here.
That's exactly
there's
right.
no doubt in my mind that I don't want you to do that job for them. I have no doubt that when they get here, they're going to tell us everything that they need. They've never lacked in telling us things that they need.
I
That's
understand.
never been a shortfall for anyone.
And I know you know that part of our job and my job is to make certain that we talk to them about what those needs are and trying to set some priorities and making recommendations to you, because I know you're going to want to hear our recommendations about what we do. So I'm just previewing for you what you're going to hear, and obviously all of it, we hope, is going to change after April 10th. So with that, I appreciate the opportunity to make those comments, and Ms. Thomas is going to make the comments about the department and about the executive after the staff completes their presentation.
Well, you've talked yourself into a question. Representative Bacala.
First of all, we talk about, you just mentioned the sheriffs are going to be short. However, I think you guys are recommending we spend $82 million on other things in a supplemental appropriation. So you've chosen to leave the sheriffs out in deference to spending that money on other things.
Well, no, Representative Bacalov, the supplemental bill deals with money that is from last year's deficit. I'm sorry, last year's surplus. It doesn't have anything to do with the FY20 budget.
I'm talking about the FY19, the anticipated excess.
Right.
I'm looking on in the overview.
That's for the current year budget.
$82 million. Correct. That's what we're talking about, the current year budget.
That's in the corrections budget. The reason I refer to the sheriff's budget, it's an entirely different area of the budget, as you know.
Yeah, and I'm
reduction,
noting in this that you guys are suggesting we spend $16 million on corrections but zero on sheriffs.
That's in the current year, Representative.
Correct. That's what I'm talking about.
Well,
we left the sheriffs in the current fiscal year with about 16 or 17 million that was not appropriated, that we felt like we needed. Have we changed that position?
No, Representative Bacala, if you recall, in the budget last year, the budget you approved put some items below the line because
Right.
you anticipated that there would be additional revenue in the current year that could fund those
Correct.
below the line items. Because the Speaker failed to recognize any revenue at the November meeting that would have allowed us
Let me
finish, please, would have allowed that money to be used as you directed as below the line expenditures. It didn't happen. That didn't change the fact that the need was still there. That's why the recommendation for use of the excess in the current year is to do what would have been done before the end of the calendar year, but we did not have the revenue recognized. It's one of the points we made because the budget bill said you had to do it by December 31st.
Okay, and I agree that it was below the line money. Now we're saying we're going to have what was necessary for below the line, but it doesn't look like that's where you want to place it. But I might
That
be
is where we're going to
misunderstanding.
place it.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm afraid you are, because that's what we're suggesting. We do want to place it in the bill that will fund this year's excess that could have been recognized last year and will be recognized hopefully in a little bit.
I'm going to change topics for a moment. You mentioned earlier how much money is totally has not been recognized in total REC next year.
Well, it depends on which forecast is adopted. Right now, the revenue
Well, let me make it simple. What part of that was fees and self-generated?
how much? Yeah, about $3 billion.
Okay, so about almost, 99% of the money that we're trying to deal with here is at fees and self-generated.
Well, it certainly is much larger than the general fund money that
$3
we're talking
billion
about.
versus 100 and something million, maybe.
Yeah, I'll go along with that.
So I just want to make a point here. When it was recommended that we adopt the REC forecast in its total, 3 people voted for that, and that vote included recognizing that $3 billion.
Right.
When the Speaker suggested let's recognize the $3 billion, nobody would go along with that. But all 4 members of REC, we're not speaking technically or legally, but all 4 members of REC recognize that $3 billion should be recognized at different points at different votes. So therefore, I think it's very appropriate that it be included in this HB 105 because other than the technicality that it wasn't voted on the same time, all 4 members voted at some point that $3 billion should be recognized. I just want to make that point. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The Speaker and the Chairman's bill do that by picking and choosing. We want the good stuff. We want the stat deads and the self-generated money that's there now, but we
Jay,
don't
did
want
everybody
to use the
agree at a different point in time that should be recognized, even if it wasn't on the same vote? Three people tried to watch that and say yes to that, and the speaker did in a separate vote, agreed with you in the separate vote. So everybody, all four members, thought the fees and self-generated was a good number that should be recognized. All four, just not at the same vote. Is that correct?
You have to have.
Is it correct?
You have to have.
Jay, is it correct? Did all four of y'all at some point agree that we should recognize the $3 billion?
Well, at some point, everybody
That's a
said
yes or no question, Jay.
Let me answer you, Representative Bacala, because you have to understand the explanation why it's yes or no. The attempt to say, I want to recognize the official forecast. You have to have an official forecast, only one. I want to recognize the forecast from right now for the fees and self-generated because we got to have that money. Otherwise, we got a $3 billion hole. But I don't want to recognize the current number for state general fund. That is a ridiculous inconsistency, and that's what's before you in the bill right now. And at the end of the day, you've got to have a single forecast based on the same time period, not two time periods. That's why the answer to your question is yes, we all agree that stat deads and self-generate ought to be recognized, but only three of the four of us agree that it's got to be at the same time. The speaker wanted to have it both ways. I don't want the general fund money, but I want the good stuff right now. And you can't have that inconsistency. You got to have one forecast, and I think we will. I hope and pray we will on April the 10th. So this whole process is not going to be further convoluted.
I'm just trying to recognize that I think it's a legitimate point that HB 105 recognizes revenue that all four members of REC agreed should be recognized and omitted the 1% of the forecast that all three members could not agree upon, because we know that this is a crazy process because of the lack of the executive budget. But that's it. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, if we could start actually on the division administration.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members, we're back on page 17 of the Executive Department is the beginning of the Division of Administration. And we're starting off with kind of a high-level look. There are four programs within the division: the Executive Administration, Community Development Block Grant, and Auxiliary Agencies. And you'll see there's a number of offices there. There's over 20 offices within the division's purview. Some of those are found in ancillary, which is different than what's funded in House Bill 105. Those are in the ancillary appropriations bill. On page 18, we get kind of another high-level look at some of the activities, some of the major activities, I'll say, that take place within the division. And again, we're just going to, I'm going to glance past those so you can have that for reference, and we'll get to their budget history on the next page. Again, this is one of the budgets that has a tremendous amount of federal dollars in it, so I've truncated that federal portion off from the general fund and state effort at the bottom. We've got the division's early years. Again, this is kind of mirrors the overall executive department's budget history slides, where those actual expenditures up top show some of the old disaster money that came in from past hurricanes, and even some of the recovery money that we got from federal dollars that came from stimulus monies from the recession. State effort, we've got different funding levels there, from CDBG money, that's sort of their revolving loan payments that they have, those economic development loan payments, so that fluctuates a little bit, but the state effort's mainly composed of that fee portion. And then we've got some different numbers here, fluctuations, I guess I should say, for the general fund. That's been up and down. We had a high mark in FY number 15, right around $64 million. For FY 18, they actually spent about $49 last year. And for current budget and for FY 20, those numbers haven't really changed too much for comparing their budget and actuals. But if we dig into some of their individual means of finance on page 20, you'll see the division has about $50 million in general fund for House Bill 105. That's a decrease of $435,000. There's $58.4 million increase in interagency transfers. That's an increase of about $486,000. Most of that is driven by just additional budget authority that's for state buildings and grounds and facility planning, so they can spend those fees and self-generated revenue on standard statewide adjustments. And you'll see something similar in the fees. That's about $37 million in HB 105, just about $580,000 increase from the current year. And again, it's just to add more budget authority to cover those normal expenditure changes. Dedications were about $130,000. That's a decrease of $3.3 million. Most of this, in fact, all of this is predominantly just over collections money. If you remember back at the end of one of the last special sessions, we funded the LaGov implementation with a portion of it was over collections money, about $3.3 million. So that was in the FY19 budget. It's been removed out of the over collections authority for next year. And then for federal dollars, we have about $900 million. It's just about $280,000 over the current year. So they're estimating about the same level of activity or hopeful activity there in the federal programs.
Quick question. When you look at the percent change from actuals, it looks like under the state general fund, they're actually going up by 2%?
Correct. They're going up about 2%. Most of that general fund in the division goes to pay for some of those statewide offices, office planning and budget, and some of the others. So most of that goes for their personnel. So the changes that you see in state general fund, that's mainly going to mirror salaries, related benefits. If they have any kind of personnel changes, those are going to impact their general fund numbers and their actual general fund spending there.
Gotcha. So based on what we budgeted them versus based on what they actually used, it's going up by 2%.
Correct. Comparing with the actual numbers, it's 2% increased.
Gotcha. Okay.
And then on page 21, we look at those expenditure changes. We've got changes in a number of categories for the division administration. Some of those major ones we're going to see on the next page, on page 22. But a few to draw your attention to. There's about a slight 2% increase in salaries. Most of it is coming from that related benefits category, about $1.8 million. Small decrease in operating services, professional services. Other charges is down $4.9 million, and about a $200,000 increase in acquisitions. They did not have any change in authorized positions, so they're going to remain at 504 authorized positions for FY20. Looking a little bit more in depth at some of those changes on the expenditure level, there's a $2.5 million increase in personal services, and that's kind of the salaries and related benefits categories combined. Most of this is all connected with statewide standard adjustments. So when they create the budget and they reevaluate the salary base, they're accounting for the civil service changes, those market rate adjustments, related benefits base adjustment, retirement, group insurance, and some of those just standard statewide changes that happen from budget to budget. There's also that $4.9 million decrease in other charges. That's from really two major things happening: the removal of the one-time money that was added in over collections for LaGov, and then a reduction of $1.4 million that's in rent savings. This is really just a result of bond payments in the Claiborne building. That building has paid off its bonds, and rent has decreased as a need resulting from that. So anybody that's in the Claiborne building saw a decrease in rent. And then there's also a $200,000 increase in acquisitions and major repairs. Most of that comes in replacing equipment, some vehicles and tools that's used by state buildings and grounds to maintain those buildings and grounds. Then on page 23, we get a look at their personnel. For FY19-20, there's about $30 million in salaries and other compensation in HB 105. $21.7 million related benefits. That's a grand total of $56.7 million in total personnel. When you back out all those other charges, those federal dollars and the CDBG money that they have there, some of that's in other charges, there's about 77% of their budget spent on personnel. Once again, there's 504 authorized positions, 411 are classified, 93 are unclassified. They also have 31 other charges positions and 6 non-TO FTEs. As of January 31st, there were about 44 vacancies in the division administration. And then when we get a look at sort of their historical FTEs compared to salaries and other compensation, you'll notice there were some high numbers early 2000s. Then we had a number of consolidations, and then we had the Office of Technology Services being moved over to the ancillary bill. So this transition took place between 2013 and 2015, where number of those factors that were happening, mainly the OTS transition, reduced the number of TO that they had and reduced the corresponding expenditure items that they would have. But since that has leveled off, the divisions had about the same number of FTEs and the same number of salaries and expenditures since then. And I also want to note the Division of Administration does have a debt service program, and that's in Schedule 20 of House Bill 105. They fund a number of different debt items that you're going to see listed over here to the right. A lot of that has to do with state buildings, has to do with the maintenance on state buildings. There's also the Louisiana Public Finance Authority debt service, some road hazard cost disallowance. That's the debt we owe to CMS, so the federal, we owe the federal money for misuse of Medicaid money a long time ago. But total, that debt service and state, or the DOA debt service is at $91 million for FY20. It's just a decrease of $5 million for the next year. And then finally, our contacts for the Division Administration, of course, Jay Darden is our commissioner, and then Barbara Goodson, our deputy commissioner, and Desiree Honore Thomas, the assistant commissioner, who's here with me right now, and we'd be happy to answer questions about the division's budget for FY20.
Got one question, Representative Amity.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, a simple one. From page 23, Chris, Department of Administration had 44 vacancies as of January. Are those funded, and what are the plans? Will they be filled?
Good morning, Desiree Honore Thomas, the Division of Administration. Representative Amade, as usual, most state agencies go through a fluctuation. All of those are funded, and we do intend to fill them, but certainly as we fill them, we lose people. And so that's for 504 TO, it's less than 10%. And so we fluctuate really normally around 35.
Okay, so this is only slightly higher than average for you?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And my next question is about the chart on page 20. I'm having the same math problem I had before. Looking at the statutory dedications, I see in the change from existing a large negative number, and the percentage at the end, the change from actuals, is a huge 432.4% increase, and we're talking about statutory dedications. So what kind of dedicated funds are we including here, and why such a drastic change projected?
I think I can, the drastic change is going to be mainly because the bulk of that $3 million was just a one-time fluctuation that was added actually in the supplemental bill last year. So it was added into FY19 to partially fund the LeGov implementation block for this current year. Usually the division does not have that over-collections bump in there. They have the State Emergency Response Fund really makes up some of that, $130,000, and then the Energy Performance Contract Fund makes up about $30,000 of that too.
Okay, so this should level off after fiscal year 20 or 21?
Depending, if something else, a need arises, there's over collections money can be used for a number of different purposes. If there was a purpose and they had the money in the over collections fund, that could be added back, but that's really more of just a substantial, if there was a need and funding available for over collections.
Okay, and so if the bulk of that was related to LeGov?
Correct. Representative Amade, if you recall, approximately 8 or 9 years ago, the state started a transition to a new statewide management system, which included, accounting, budgeting, HR, and when we walked in the door, there were only 6 state departments of the executive branch of government moved over and migrated over to that system. So in last legislative session, you all appropriated funds for us to begin the transition, to begin to move all of them, because the statewide accounting system that we use today is well over 20 years old. So this money was put there last year to help us begin that migration and transition to those systems.
Right, so from 6 departments, how many are we at today? What's the progress?
See, I could count them up real quick.
You want how many different?
While you're counting, my next question is going to be in what year do we expect all of them to be online?
I know we're ahead of schedule, but 2021.
That's always nice to hear.
Yes.
So 2021 is a target year for
Yes.
all of the agencies to be included?
Correct.
Okay.
There's about 11 coming online this year. I don't have the total that came on before the current year. That
I'm assuming that the gentleman that just sat down next to you has some numbers he
No.
wants to share.
Richard Howes, I'm looking for them in my documentation. Yeah, we'll bring 10 on in the fall of this year, in 2019.
And the remainder in 2020?
There will be 8 agencies in 2020, and the balance in Wave 3, as we reference it, will be completed in the fall of 2021.
Okay.
And we'll be completely finished.
So we're still 2 years out,
Yes, ma'am.
and we've been 8 years already.
Correct.
Okay. And the current accounting system is over 20 years old. Okay, so what's the danger that when we finally reach year number 10, that this accounting system will now be a senior citizen in accounting system terms, and we'll have to start looking for the next one?
In our new SAP system, we've implemented it in a way that we can keep the software updated as it relates to the upgrades that the company provides. So this system is not expected to age out like our legacy systems are today.
Okay.
Yes.
So
We'll always be able to keep it up to date, running current supported versions.
okay, unlike things like our cell phones, right? This is different, right?
It is different.
Okay.
Yes. Very large company. We stay on top of their updates so that we can remain current.
Okay. Should we mark this down? That's exciting. Thank you. Okay, and my last question was just to tell me about the Restore Louisiana funds. What are we doing with them?
So, any particular, with regard, when you say what are we doing with them, the Restore program is still in process, of course. And actually, that's why we have some excess authority. If you recall, we came before the JLCB in last fiscal year and asked for additional authority to move money out. And we have received the majority of the applicants for the program. Many have been, the environmentals have been performed. Many have received awards. We are now waiting, and expect at the end of May or the beginning of June some resolution on the additional appropriation from Congress relative to the duplication of benefits. So we have not, we do have the ability, those funds were appropriated, but without guidance, HUD guidance to get the money out. So we're waiting that.
Okay, so we're waiting on Washington.
Correct.
Okay. Did you have something you needed to add there?
Not really. She nailed it.
Okay, very good. Well, I'm good too. All right. Thank you. That's all.
Representative Bacala.
Yeah, Mr. Darden, please. Jay, even though we're looking at a $2.4 million reduction in the total budget of the Division of Administration, it looks like there was about a $4.5 million last year in sort of one time. I think that would be the over collections and such. But so in net, you have less obligations that seem to offset the 2.4. So just generally speaking, is a 2 point or is the overall budget? Give me a thumbs up, thumbs down on this version as it pertains to the Division of Administration. Thumbs up.
I'm going to give you a thumbs up.
All right. Thank you. That's it.
Mr. Chairman and members, I do want to mention the increase that we did show for personnel services. If you recall, for the first time in the last 2 years, civil servants received market adjustments, as well as there was an increase in the overall related benefits percentage from 37 to 40%. So that's the only increase we've shown, and those were regular mandatory adjustments.
And that'll apply to everybody, all civil servants.
Okay. That concludes Division Administration, correct? Board's clear. Stadium and Exposition District.
Thank you.
If y'all want to make your way down.
All right, and members, the Louisiana Stadium and Exposition District will bring us back to page 26. And just to give you a quick overview again, Louisiana Stadium and Exposition District is the owner and the manager of most of our sporting events, arenas. You'll see a list of those different facilities down there, most of which are, the big ones are managed through a private contract with SMG, with the exception of some of the smaller ones as you see there. And they also administer the capital outlay portion for those respective facilities as well. If you want to turn to page 27, we'll look at their budget history. First thing you'll notice is that the LSED does not receive any general fund. Kind of left that line there at the bottom that you can see those zeros across the bottom. And I've also noted that the 2012 new lease kind of divider there, so you can see the difference. Before that time, you would have seen general fund in some of these budgets. But nowadays we've gone completely general fund free in the Stadium and Exposition District. There is a fork that you see in a few of those early years. The stadium did have included in its budget some interagency transfers. That was some of those community development grants that were from the Division Administration, the Office of Community Development. They usually get a little supplemental money depending on the fiscal year and how their actual revenue collections are doing for their fees. Or in certain cases, you know, if a Super Bowl happens or things like that, where they need a little more extra authority. You'll also note that they had a really, really good year here in FY18. You know, kind of exceptionally big activities that were happening here at the arena and at the Dome. Again, like WrestleMania, extra Pelicans playoff games, Garth Brooks at the Bayou Superfest. That really added to them having just a exceptional year. And for FY19 and 20, those have kind of recalibrated and are back on some of those normal projections. On the next page, we get a look at some of their funding change for FY20. Their budget is entirely based on fees and self-general revenue and statutory dedications. For FY20, we're looking at $77 million in fees and self-gen. That's about $990,000 over the current year, and $17.5 million in statutory dedications. And that is primarily due to an increase of $1.2 million from the New Orleans Sports Franchise Fund. And the fees and self-gen, I'll note, this is primarily driven by the hotel occupancy tax collections. It's the state sales tax on hotels in Orleans and Jefferson Parish, that 4%, and then all the miscellaneous income that they get from the event rentals and from those events that happen at the facilities. Looking at expenditures, everything that flows through the Stadium and Exposition District, it's really put into a big pot that SMG administers on their side. They don't use the state's accounting system. So purposes of the budget process, everything is put in operating services, which is mainly debt and other charges for the flow-through. That's about $2.1 million we categorize for other charges increase for FY20. And again, they have, because it's all contracted through SMG, there are no authorized positions in the Stadium and Exposition District. Because of this, we put together this extra slide for you on page 30. And that gives you kind of a side-by-side comparison of their projected revenue for FY20 and their projected expenses. The stadium breaks this down into 3 different pots on the expenses side. I'll show you the revenue. We look at that self-gen and the statutory dedications. There's the sales tax again, the 4% on the local Orleans and Jefferson hotels, Mercedes-Benz Superdome events, and then the Smoothie King Center events and Champion Square net them another about a little under $30 million there. And then their statutory dedications, the New Orleans Sports Franchise Fund, Sports Facility Assistance Fund, the Sports Franchise Assistance Fund, and the LSED License Plate Fund. Very similar names, though. And then for expenses, we break those down into team lease entitlements, and these are basically the contractual obligations that the state has with those teams. And then facilities expenses, so you see the Superdome takes up the bulk of those at about $20 million, and about 4.8 for the Smoothie King Center. And then the remainder in blue are the LSED expenses. Most of that comes into the LSED Administrative Fund, and then I'm sorry, that's the debt service there, and then LSED Administrative is about $12 million, capital maintenance at 2.3, and management fees at 1.4. And that really is our kind of a high-level look at the Stadium and Exposition District, and we've got our LSED contacts here if we have any questions.
Representative Berthelot?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The gentleman in the middle, right here.
Oh, here you are, right in front of me. Sorry.
You, David?
I'm Evan.
Evan, okay.
Yes,
The number of dollars y'all have on hand that are not budgeted, I don't want to use the word surplus or excess. I'm going to call them funds on hand, not budgeted. Is that a substantial amount?
I'm assuming you're referencing dollars at the end of a budget year, whatever's the fund balance at the end of the year.
I'm talking
That's
about
what you're
total
referencing?
dollars.
Yeah, it depends. It depends a lot on the event activity. I think Chris made a good point about fiscal year 18 when we're doing more than we expected versus other years where the touring industry and Pelicans and Saints aren't making the playoffs. So it ebbs and flows. So it could be between $2 to $6 million at the end of the year, plus or minus on either end, depending on how we do.
How about the funds on hand outside the budget? Do y'all have dollars that are available for catastrophic, something happens to?
Well, that's typically the source. I mean, that's...
So you don't have a fund that has millions of dollars in it to kind of back up this operation?
We're not sitting on a war chest, if that's what you're inferring. No, every dollar that comes through the budget, and just to kind of maybe take a step back, when we operate through the three buckets that I think Chris did a good job of illustrating, at the end of the year, the balance at the end of that fiscal year is going to be between $2 and $6 million. Now, that is the source that we use to reinvest back into the facility. Our board passes a capital encumbrance package, and that's based off of a $80-90 million capital improvement plan that we develop for not only the Superdome, Smoothie King Center, all the other facilities. I want to make sure it's not just the Superdome we're talking about here. So that's the source that we use for capital improvements or renovations or repairs, pipes, wires, etc. And then that exhausts the balance of all funding from the hotel occupancy tax, self-generated, that come through the budget that was on the screen.
Okay, so y'all not in any discussion with the city of New Orleans right now about some of your occupancy tax money?
We've been...
And I'm only bringing it up because it's money related. I'm just...
Sure, that's right. Well, that's right. Well, we're the largest recipient of the hotel occupancy tax in Orleans and Jefferson Parish. We use those funds as the primary security for our debt. It's the post-Katrina debt, so there's $23.5 million that the hotel occupancy tax secures. So that comes through a trustee bank we don't even see. The balance of the hotel occupancy tax is used for the operation of the facilities to manage the Superdome, Smoothie King Center, Shrine on Airline, and some other obligations we have with TPC. So all of that goes into the operation, and it comes through. So the point we've made with folks at the city, and it's been a very constructive conversation, is that any adjustment or any impact to any collections, namely the hotel occupancy tax, all that does is further reduce that $2 to $6 million fund balance at the end of the year. And then depending on the year, if it's on the lower end, then that's when you run the risk of potentially needing some help from the state general fund, which we don't want to do. And also, in addition to that, what it does is it limits your ability to do capital investment every year. So what happens is you start to find yourself kind of varying from your improvement plan versus what you're actually funding. And the delta between is what eventually becomes a big renovation project. We need to come to capital outlay or need other help from other sources. So we've been able to stay, as Chris mentioned, out of the general fund for almost 8-9 years now since we renegotiated the Saints and Pelican leases. So that's by design. And we've also been able to stay out of the capital outlay bill for all intents and for most intents and purposes. There were a couple projects in there that for the Pelicans, namely for an arena renovation, but we've tried to stay out of your hair as best we could.
We like that. We appreciate that.
So anything that kind of takes you off that trajectory potentially risks that. Now there's there's conversations going on, and I think there's a solution in the near to interim term. But
Okay.
We've been involved. Yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Quick question. LSED, they manage the dome facility, correct?
The LSED owns the facility. The LSED, through the governor's office, contracts with SMG, of which I'm an employee, a private management firm.
So can you give us a breakdown, not now, but can you give me a breakdown of the LSED administrative expenses, which are about $12 million, and then there's a management fee of $1.4 million? Those two things, obviously that's some significant dollars there. Can you, at some point in time in the very near future?
Sure. I have it in front of me, but I can
Just
can
send
present.
it. I'd rather give it to everybody
Okay,
than just
sure.
me. It makes it easy. If you just email it to me, we'll connect. That's the only question. I would just like to get a breakdown of that on the expense side.
Sure, we have that.
And the board is clear.
All right,
Thank you for coming.
Yeah, I'll sign it.
All right, move on to the Inspector General.
All right, members, the Inspector General starts on page 31. And we look here at an overview of the Inspector General's activities here. Mainly you'll see the audit and investigation side and the prevention, all doing with looking for and finding fraud and waste in government, state government. Page 32, we'll look at their budget history. The Inspector General's budget is nearly all state general fund. They do have a very small chunk of fees and self-generated revenue that we'll talk about. But I took off the state effort and also the general fund line because they're almost all one and the same there. So you'll see not too much dramatic shifts within the Office of Inspector General. Back in FY11, they actually spent about $1.6 million. And in FY18, they actually spent 1.7. So just a slight increase there, maybe about 6% over that 8-year period. Currently, they're budgeted $2.1 million, and for FY20, 2.2. Taking a look at that breakdown, again, most of this is all general fund, 2.17 for FY20. And this federal funds, not fees and self-generated revenue, about $16 million or $16,000 for FY20. And this is for, I believe it comes from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI funds there, which is doesn't always come in. And then if we look at their expenditure change over time, there's 3 categories that are looking for change in FY20. Salaries and related benefits will see slight increases. This is just the cost related to salary adjustments, the market rate adjustment as well, and the related benefits increase that we mentioned earlier. And then other charges, this is really just their statewide IET, the transfers that they have to make to risk management for those fees, for rent in their building, and for Office of Technology Services. So the biggest one's about a 15% increase in their other charges for those purposes. And no change in authorized positions. Inspector General's had 16 authorized positions, and they will remain that way. And then on page 35, we look at their personnel. They have $1.2 million in salaries and $620,000 in related benefits budgeted for FY20 in HB 105. That's a total of $1.8 million. Almost all of the Inspector General's budget, 97%, when you take out those other charges, is personnel. Once again, 16 authorized positions, 14 are classified, 2 are unclassified, no other charges positions. And as of January 31st, the Inspector General had 2 vacancies in their office. I believe one of those has been filled since then, but one still remains. Over time, you'll see there's been that fluctuation around that 16 number. A couple years they had a full staff in FY 2013, 2014. But of course, there's fluctuations that happen in all offices there. But really, the change there, you see it looks big, but it's just hovering around a few numbers. And then finally, Mr. Stephen Street's here with me, the Inspector General, and we'd be happy to answer any questions you have about their budget for FY20.
Hello, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple of remarks, unless there are no questions.
There are no questions.
All right,
so
I really don't have.
Remark at your own risk.
Okay, I'm fine. I've learned to quit when I'm ahead. That's fine. Thank y'all.
Yes, sir. All right. Mental health and advocacy services.
All right, members, mental health advocacy services. You'll see a quick overview there. Really splits into two primary missions, the Child Advocacy Program and the Mental Health Advocacy Program. Again, we'll keep this here for reference. Then on page 38, looking at their budget history, I always like to make sure you are aware that Mental Health Advocacy Services budget is almost entirely non-discretionary funding. So nearly every dollar they spend comes from that non-discretionary side of providing those services. So they do see a few steady increases to make sure they're able to provide those services each year. But it does stay kind of at a predictable pace. If you look at their actual spending since FY11, they were about $2.6 million. For FY18, it's at 3.6 that they actually spent last year, and that's about 38% increase over time. The mental health advocacy services budget is made up of three sources of funds. State General Fund for FY20 is at $3.6 million. That's about $350,000 more than the current year. Interagency transfers is at $175,000. That's a no change, about the same level of funding that they have in the current year. They have no fees and self-generated revenue, and for statutory dedications, they're at $862,000. It's $156,000 more than the current year. And this is primarily all from the Indigent Parent Representation Fund. And that fund's source of money is a general fund transfer that happens in Schedule 20 in the very end of House Bill 105. There's no federal funds. That brings their grand total budget amount to about $4.7 million for FY20. Overall, that's an increase of about $500,000 or 12%, and about $1 million from the current, comparing the FY20 to their actual expenditures from last year. On the next slide, we'll take a look at their expenditure change. They've got some changes happening in a number of different categories here. Up top, the personal services, when we look at salaries, other compensation, and related benefits together, this is a combination of factors. They've added 2 new positions, attorney positions, and that increases kind of their salary base, the related benefits, but also normal readjustments that have happened in the budget process are factoring into those 3 categories as well. There's $81,000 in other charges, and that's an increase in statewide services. But mainly, the Division of Administration is now going to be performing some of the duties related to the budget for mental health advocacy services. So they reduced 1 TO. You'll also see there at the bottom right-hand slide. So added in 2 new attorneys, and they removed 1 TO. But part of that was due with this shifting some of those back office functions in the budget over to the Division of Administration. And then next, we look at their personnel information. And they have $2.6 million for salaries and other compensation with $1.3 in related benefits. And that gives them about $4 million that they spend on their personnel. When we back out that other charges amount, that's 94% of their budget expenditures. 45 of those authorized positions are total, with 44 classified and 1 unclassified position. They have no other charges positions, but they do have 2 non-TO FTEs. As of January 31st, they only had 1 vacant position. Again, you'll also see kind of that predictability over in their personnel chart here, that steady kind of increase that it almost mirrors when those market rate changes, when those state 2% the annualizations came into play. And then they've slowly added some TO over time. From fiscal year 2010 to 2017, they only had about 34 TO. And in FY19, we added some more, and FY18, we added a few more. That brings their total up to about 44, and then the net change of 1 this year will get them to 45. And then that concludes my overview for mental health advocacy services. Mr. Joseph Seiler here is can answer questions too if we have anything.
Mr. Chairman, member of the committee.
Sure, Representative Hodges.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a question. I see that the cost for mental health services has doubled since 2011. What percentage of that cost is actually used to treat the mentally ill? Right here it says negotiate cases, settle cases, civil court costs and stuff like that. Of this $4.7 million, how much is used to actually treat the mentally ill? Is it any of that in this budget?
Our name of our agency is a little deceptive. We're a law office, and we are the defending attorneys for patients who are subject to mental health proceedings. And this is why it's non-discretionary. It's a federal law requirement, since you're talking about taking people's liberty away from them and forcing treatment on them, which they do not want. So nothing is actually, we don't provide mental health treatment. We negotiate with hospitals and doctors, and we actually are able to settle about 40% of our cases so that they don't have to come to court and everybody's happy. But we don't provide the services.
So who could tell me what we are spending on treating the mentally ill, prevention of before they get to court and commit crimes, things like that?
Representative Hodges, when the Department of Health comes, they have the Office of Mental Health, and so that function rests in that office.
Okay.
And they'll be able to answer those questions specifically.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Smith.
Thank you. My question, Mr. Soller, is has there been an increase in child advocacy issues that you've been having to litigate?
Yes. Well, an increase in issues.
Well, in lawsuits
we've seen an increase in our caseload.
In the caseload, right.
I'm sure you all read last week in the paper that seems to be an unprecedented increase in the number of children that are taken into state custody in Livingston Parish, the 21st JDC. Right. And we actually, to deal with that, we actually opened an office this year in Livingston Parish for our child advocate attorneys there. We've also been asked by the Louisiana Supreme Court to take over representation of those kids in Slidell City Court, which is why we're increasing our TO. The issues that we're sort of getting involved in is we see an awful lot of these children wind up in psychiatric facilities, and they may be staying there longer than is medically necessary, given the difficulties the department may have in finding foster homes.
How does your organization interact with our indigent fund, the Public Defenders Fund? Do you have an interaction with them at all?
The public defenders are usually the attorneys for the parents in these abuse and neglect, and of course we work very closely with them. It's a small group of people that are handling all of these cases, and while of course it's an adversarial relationship when you're in court, when you're outside the court, everybody's working together.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Is that what accounts for the spike in your funding? And I mean, is it?
It's just
obviously if you were treating, if it was towards the treatment side, I think that's what people understand a spike because we've been. But as it relates to strictly to the legal side, run that back for me one more time. Exactly why those services have increased, if you don't mind.
Chairman, the Office of Mental Health Advocacy have faced some challenges in the past in retaining attorneys. As you can imagine, that's a difficult job. So over the past 4 years, there's been some structural change to the pay plan for the attorneys that do that type of work, as well as he mentioned, we've opened an office in Livingston and Slidell because of the need and the court orders associated with such. And of course, the normal 2 years of raises, the market rate adjustment for classified employees, as well as the raise in the related benefits tied to such. So the truth is, he's only really added 2 TO.
Yeah, no, I'm not knocking it. I'm just trying to get a better understanding of why. That's all. I mean, do y'all use contract? Is it all in-house, or do you use some contract?
No, it's all in-house, and it's all of our attorneys. This is all they do. They're not allowed to have an outside practice. Part of the increase in TO was that we had 4 attorneys on job appointments. We hired them to deal with what we thought might be a temporary increase in caseload in the child advocacy. Turned out to be permanent. So we simply converted them to permanent positions. It wasn't any change in our budget, but it did increase the TO.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Just wanted to get more clarification.
Sir.
All right, the board is clear. Thank you.
Thank you.
I do want to mention, as the departments come forth, there will be several that we converted to regular TO because they were job appointments. They've exceeded the time of the need for, civil service gives you authority for up to 4 years. And so in some instances, these positions like his, the attorneys, the need has stabilized, and so you will see very small tick. And as we move in future budget years, you'll see that also.
Gotcha. Representative Hodges, is your question for this?
Okay.
I just want to point out as we talk about this budget that has it's more than doubled in the past few years. Livingston, we did add Livingston, a center there.
Yes,
and
ma'am.
it's a result of the flood. And so as we're putting millions of dollars more into mental health advocacy, that we need to think about these projects that will be coming to prevent flooding, because flooding has deep and very traumatic impacts on families. And many people in Livingston Parish, we were affected the hardest from the flood. You deal with it in unhealthy ways, and that has a lingering effect and a domino effect on the future generations. Yes. And so I'm just making a point, want to really point out that we've got to remedy the flooding situation. I know that's a drum we keep beating, but we've got to do something, because it doesn't just affect that moment, it affects generations too. We've had, I've had 6 people in my subdivision die this year, and because of heart attack, stroke, and cancer, which is unprecedented. We're only in just April 1st. So in 3 months, we've had 6 people in my subdivision die. So that I just want to point out, and making a plea to please consider these projects that are going to mitigate flooding. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, board is clear.